In a world where money buys silence, one woman's voice cost a billionaire everything. Clara Hayes stood frozen, tray trembling in her hands, as Ethan Vale's cold eyes dared her to speak. The contract sat between them, $50 million, a young man's dream, and a trap so perfect it would destroy him. She had two choices: stay invisible, like she'd been trained, or shatter the careful lie that filled this room. What happened next would end her job, resurrect her past, and bring down an empire. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The restaurant didn't have a sign. That was the first thing people noticed about Aurelius, or rather, didn't notice. Tucked between a shuttered gallery and a building under permanent renovation on a Tribeca side street that most cabs avoided, it existed in that peculiar space reserved for places that didn't need to announce themselves. The kind of establishment where reservation lists were studied like intelligence briefings, where a single table might determine whether a merger proceeded or a company bled out quietly in bankruptcy court. Clara Hayes pushed through the heavy brass door at 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes before her shift started, because she was always early, always prepared, always trying to make herself small enough that nobody would notice when she inevitably made a mistake. The kitchen's heat hit her immediately, that dense, expensive warmth that came from ovens that cost more than most cars. She moved through it like a ghost, hanging her coat in the staff closet, smoothing down her regulation white shirt that she'd ironed 3 times that morning because the first 2 attempts hadn't been perfect enough. "You're bleeding anxiety into my mise en place," Chef Antoine muttered, without looking up from the scallops he was torching with the precision of a surgeon. "Whatever's eating you, leave it in the alley." "Sorry, Chef." "Don't apologize, just breathe quieter." Clara tied her black apron, checked her hair in the reflection of a stock pot, still pinned tight, not a strand loose, and tried to steady the shake in her hands that had been there since she'd woken up. It had been 3 years since she'd left Columbia Law, 3 years since she'd walked out of her contract's 2 final without finishing it, her phone vibrating with the call from Mass General that her father had collapsed in his classroom, mid-lecture on Reconstruction. 3 years since she'd traded legal briefs for order pads, case law for wine lists, a future for survival. The math was simple, even if it ate at her every single day. Her father's insurance covered exactly nothing that mattered. The experimental treatments, the specialists, the care that might give him another year, another Christmas, another chance to tell her he was proud even though she'd abandoned everything he'd sacrificed to give her. None of that was covered. So she worked. 2 shifts at Aurelius, weekend brunches at a cafe in the West Village, and overnight inventory at a warehouse in Queens when she could keep her eyes open. She slept in 4-hour intervals and dreamed in legal Latin she was forgetting more of every day. "Table 7's coming in early." Marcus, the floor manager, appeared beside her like smoke. He had that quality, the ability to materialize exactly when you least wanted him to. The Vale party. Clara's stomach dropped. "I thought I had the side stations tonight." Bethany called out, "You're on the floor." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something in his voice carried an edge. And when I say the Vale party, I mean actually pay attention. Ethan Vale. As in Vale equity. As in, if you spill so much as a drop of water on him, you're not just fired. You're unhireable in the city. Understood? Understood. I'm serious, Clara. This isn't some trust fund kid playing venture capitalist. Vale's the real thing. The kind of money that makes other money nervous. Marcus straightened his tie, which was already perfect. He's bringing someone. Probably another execution disguised as dinner. Just keep the drinks filled and your mouth shut. The words stuck in her throat. Yes, chef. Yes, Marcus. Yes, to whatever kept her employed for another week. But she managed a nod. The dining room was still mostly empty, that strange calm before the evening chaos. Aurelius held 46 seats across 12 tables, each positioned with the kind of strategic spacing that suggested privacy while maintaining perfect sight lines. The lighting was calibrated to make everyone look powerful and no one look drunk. The acoustics were designed so that conversations died at table edges, never traveling to neighboring ears. It was a stage set for secrets. Clara checked her section, tables 7, 8, and 9, the corner booth and its satellites. She aligned the silverware that didn't need aligning, adjusted the wine glasses that were already perfect, and tried to remember the breathing exercises her father had taught her when she was 17 and terrified of the LSATs. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You're smarter than your fear, except she wasn't, apparently. Smart enough to get into Columbia, sure. Smart enough to survive 2 years of professors who treated Socratic method like psychological warfare, but not smart enough to figure out how to save her father and save herself at the same time. The door opened. Ethan Vale didn't walk into rooms. He disrupted them. Clara had seen powerful people before, had served enough Manhattan elites to recognize the usual patterns. The loud ones who needed everyone to know they'd arrived. The quiet ones who expected the room to simply understand their importance. The ones who brought their own weather systems of entitlement and assumed the world would adjust. Vale was different. He was 32. She'd Googled him during her break yesterday when Marcus had first mentioned the reservation, but carried himself with the kind of certainty usually reserved for men twice his age. Tall, dark suit that probably cost more than her annual rent, and eyes that didn't scan the room so much as categorize it. Assess, calculate, dismiss. Behind him came a younger man, maybe 26, with the kind of nervous energy that radiated off him like heat shimmer. He clutched a leather portfolio against his chest like a shield. "Mr. Vale," Marcus materialized, all professional warmth that never reached his eyes. "Your usual table." "Thank you, Marcus." Vale's voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of quiet that made people lean in and listen harder. "This is David Chen. He'll be joining me." David Chen looked like he was walking to his own execution. His handshake with Marcus was damp, fumbling. His eyes darted around the restaurant as if mapping escape routes. Clara stayed back, professional distance, as Marcus led them to table 7. The corner booth, with its view of the entire room, its back to the wall. A position of power. "Your server will be with you momentarily," Marcus said, and vanished. Clara counted to 10, not too eager, not too slow, and approached with water glasses already filled. No ice because Vale's assistant had called ahead with specifications. Room temperature Evian, specific placement on the right side of the place setting, refreshed every 12 minutes or when reduced below 2/3. The details that separated Aurelius from everywhere else. "Good evening, gentlemen." She set the glasses down with hands she'd trained into steadiness. "My name is Clara. I'll be taking care of you tonight." Vale didn't look at her. His attention was fixed on David Chen with the intensity of a predator who'd already calculated every move of the hunt. David managed a nervous smile. "Thank you. Can I start you with drinks? We have a 2015 Chateau Margaux that Chef is particularly excited about this evening." "The Margaux," Vale said, still not looking at her. "And bring menus, though I doubt we'll need them. We're not here for the food." The words carried a weight that made David Chen flinch. Clara nodded and retreated, her heart hammering in a way that annoyed her. She'd served hundreds of people, thousands. This was just another table, another shift, another step in the endless grind of survival. Except something felt wrong. She couldn't name it, not yet, but it sat in her stomach like bad coffee. The way Vale had positioned himself. The way David couldn't stop fidgeting with his portfolio. The way the air around table 7 seemed to thicken with something that wasn't quite threat, but definitely wasn't comfort. In the wine cellar, she found the Margaux, $800 a bottle, casual money for men like Vale, and brought it to Marcus for approval. "Decant it," he said. "Give it 20 minutes. And Clara?" "Yes?" "Invisible. That's your job tonight. Invisible and perfect." 20 minutes later, she poured the wine with the careful precision of someone who'd studied the ritual until muscle memory took over. Vale accepted his glass with a nod that might have been acknowledgement or dismissal. David took his with both hands, like he was afraid he'd drop it. "To new beginnings," Vale said, raising his glass. David's smile was pure anxiety. "To partnership." They drank. Clara stepped back to the server station, close enough to respond, far enough to disappear. And then Vale began to speak. "I've been watching your company for 8 months, David. You know that, of course. My analysts have been thorough." Vale's tone was conversational, almost friendly. "TerraStream is brilliant. The water purification technology, the scalability model, the potential market penetration, it's exactly the kind of innovation that changes industries." David sat up straighter, hope flickering across his face like sunlight breaking through clouds. "We've worked incredibly hard. My team, your team is you, 3 engineers who are underpaid, and an advisor who checked out 6 months ago." Vale set down his wine glass with surgical precision. Let's not romanticize it. You built something valuable despite having no business infrastructure, no market connections, and funding that runs out in, he glanced at his watch, approximately 47 days. The hope on David's face guttered. Which is why you're here, Vale continued. Why you answered my email within 20 minutes. Why you've been hemorrhaging sleep for the past 3 weeks, trying to figure out how to survive until Q4. Clara, standing by the water station, felt her lawyer instincts twitch. There was a rhythm to Vale's words, a structure. He was building something, brick by brick, boxing David in with facts that couldn't be disputed. I'm offering you $50 million, Vale said, and let the number hang in the air like a blade. Full funding for the next development phase, access to my manufacturing partners in Southeast Asia, distribution networks across 14 countries, everything you need to take TerraStream from a garage project to a global solution. David's hands trembled. The portfolio on his lap seemed to be the only thing keeping him grounded. That's incredibly generous, Mr. Vale. It's business, David, not generosity. Vale leaned back, the leather booth creaking softly. I don't invest in ideas, I invest in returns. TerraStream has the potential to generate substantial returns. And in exchange? David's voice was barely above a whisper. A partnership agreement. Vale gestured, and Clara realized he wanted something. She approached, and he handed her a manila folder without looking at her. Clara, would you mind placing this on the table? She took the folder, set it between them, and retreated. David stared at it like it might explode. Standard terms, Vale said. You retain 30% equity. I take 60%. The remaining 10 goes into an employee pool for future hires. You maintain operational control for the first year with strategic oversight from my team. After year 1, we reassess based on performance metrics. The numbers sounded reasonable, almost generous even. Clara had studied enough corporate law to recognize the general structure. It was a fairly typical equity split for a Series A investment, maybe even weighted slightly in the founder's favor considering the desperation of his position. But something nagged at her. I'd like to have my lawyer review this, David said, touching the folder like it might burn him. Of course. Vale's smile didn't reach his eyes. Though I should mention I have 3 other water purification startups I'm considering. 2 of them are further along in development. I'm meeting with their founders tomorrow and Wednesday. David went pale. I see. I prefer to work with you, David. Your technology is superior. Your passion is evident. But passion doesn't keep companies alive. Capital does. Decisions do. Vale refilled David's wine glass, a gesture that might have seemed generous in any other context. My offer expires when I leave this table tonight. Clara felt her chest tighten. She'd seen this move before, in the contracts classes she'd abandoned. The artificial deadline, the manufactured urgency, the pressure designed to prevent due diligence, to force a decision before reason could intervene. That's not much time to... It's enough time to decide if you want to save your company or watch it collapse. Vale's voice never rose, never hardened. That was the remarkable thing. He could eviscerate someone with the same tone he used to order wine. I'm offering you a lifeline, David. The question is whether you're drowning enough to grab it. The cruelty of it struck Clara like a physical blow. Not because it was loud or dramatic, because it wasn't. Because it was calculated. Because Vale had clearly done this before, many times, and had refined it to an art form. David opened the folder with shaking hands. Clara moved to refresh their water glasses, an excuse to get closer, to see. Her hands performed the mechanical task while her eyes scanned the document David was now reading, his face growing paler with each page. The contract was dense, maybe 40 pages of legal language in 8-point font, designed to be intimidating, impenetrable. To make someone like David, brilliant with technology, ignorant of corporate law, feel stupid and overwhelmed. She caught fragments as she poured. Standard boilerplate on the first few pages. Definitions, representations, warranties. Nothing unusual. But then, buried on page 17, a clause that made her breath catch. Section 8.3. Acceleration upon qualified triggering event. Her eyes moved faster, her legal training kicking in despite the years of rust. The language was deliberately obscure, wrapped in layers of defined terms that referenced other sections. But the structure was clear once you knew how to read it. If TerraStream's valuation increased by more than 300% within the first 5 years, a threshold that any successful startup would easily cross, a qualified triggering event would occur. And upon that event, Vail's equity position would automatically adjust from 60% to 85%. David's 30% would collapse to 15%. But it was worse than that. Section 8.3 also included a repurchase right, allowing Vail to buy out David's remaining equity at a predetermined formula, one that valued the company at its current worth, not its future worth. Essentially, if TerraStream became valuable, David could be forced to sell his shares for pennies on the dollar. The entire agreement was a time bomb. It looked like partnership but functioned like delayed theft. Clara's hands had stopped moving. She was standing frozen, water pitcher in hand, staring at words that David Chen clearly didn't understand. This seems... David's voice cracked. There's a lot here. It's a standard investment agreement, Vail said smoothly. My lawyers are thorough, but the core terms are what we discussed. 50 million, 60-40 split. Partnership. It was technically true, and completely devastatingly misleading. Clara moved back to her station, her mind racing. This wasn't her business. This wasn't her problem. She was a waitress. Her job was to serve food, clear plates, and collect tips that would pay for her father's next round of medication. Speaking up would accomplish exactly nothing except getting her fired. She knew this with absolute certainty, and yet she watched David Chen, this young man who'd probably spent years building something he believed in, something that could genuinely help people access clean water, and she watched him being systematically dismantled by someone who'd turned exploitation into a business model. I'm not sure, David said weakly. Maybe if I could just have until tomorrow. I'm meeting with Aquacore Technologies. Vail checked his phone with deliberate casualness. They're based in Stockholm, slightly less elegant solution than yours, but they have better market testing, and their founder doesn't hesitate. The threat landed like a hammer. David picked up the pen that had been resting beside the contract. His hand shook so badly that Clara could see it from 15 feet away. Mr. Vail, I need to understand all the implications. The implications are simple. Vail's patience was wearing thin now, an edge creeping into his measured tone. Sign, and your company survives. Your team keeps their jobs. Your technology reaches the people who need it. Hesitate, and I walk away. Aquacore gets the funding. TerraStream becomes a footnote in a thesis paper about startups that almost made it. Clara gripped the edge of the server station. Her professional training screamed at her to stay silent. Her survival instincts demanded invisibility. But her legal training, the part of her she'd buried but never quite killed, was howling. This was fraud. Maybe not technically, maybe not in a way that would survive a courtroom challenge, but spiritually, morally, it was fraud. It was a predator using superior knowledge and resources to strip someone of everything they'd built. David's pen touched the signature line. Wait. The word came out before Clara could stop it. Quiet, but in the careful acoustics of Aurelius, it carried. Every head in the restaurant turned. Marcus, halfway across the room, froze. Chef Antoine, visible through the kitchen window, stopped mid-motion. And Ethan Vail, for the first time since entering the restaurant, looked directly at Clara. His eyes were cold, evaluating, the look of someone categorizing a new problem. Excuse me? His voice was soft, dangerous. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to apologize, to retreat, to disappear back into the safety of invisibility. Instead, she stepped forward. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, and her voice only shook a little. But I think there might be something in that contract that Mr. Chen should review more carefully. The silence that followed was absolute. David looked confused. Vail looked like he was calculating exactly how to destroy her. Marcus looked like he was watching his entire career collapse in real time. Clara? Marcus's voice cut across the room. A word. Now. She didn't move. Section 8.3, she said, looking at David, not Vail. The acceleration clause? You should read it very carefully before you sign anything. Vail stood up slowly. He was tall. She hadn't realized quite how tall until he was standing, looking down at her with an expression that mixed fury and something that might have been curiosity. And you are? He asked quietly. No one, Clara said. Just someone who happened to notice. Clara is our server. Marcus had materialized beside her, his hand on her elbow, gripping hard enough to hurt. And she's leaving, right now. Clara, you're finished for the evening. I'm trying to help. You're fired. Marcus's voice was flat, final. Collect your things, leave. But David Chen had picked up the contract now, flipping pages with sudden urgency. What acceleration clause? What does that mean? It means nothing, Vale said, his attention still fixed on Clara with laser focus. It's standard protective language that it means if your company succeeds, he takes most of it. Clara knew she was burning every bridge, knew she'd regret this in about 10 minutes, but the words kept coming anyway. The equity split he described isn't real. There's a clause that triggers if your valuation increases beyond a threshold, which any successful company would hit. When that happens, his percentage jumps to 85%. Yours drops to 50%. And then he can force you to sell your remaining shares at a formula that values the company at today's worth, not tomorrow's. David's face went white. Is that true? It's a standard anti-dilution protection, Vale started. It's not. Clara's voice was stronger now, the rust falling away from her legal training like old paint. Anti-dilution clauses protect investors from future funding rounds. This is different. This is designed to trigger based on success metrics, and it fundamentally restructures the equity split you agreed to. If TerraStream becomes valuable, Mr. Vale doesn't just get returns on his investment, he gets your company. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen had stopped its background clatter. Vale turned to her fully now, and his smile was surgical. You seem to know a lot about contract law for a waitress. I know enough to recognize a scam. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Marcus looked like he might faint. Clara, stop talking right now. But Ethan Vale raised a hand, silencing him. No, let her continue. This is fascinating. He stepped closer to Clara, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and deliberately understated. You think you understand my business better than I do? I think I understand contract law better than you hoped I would. And where did you study contract law? Let me guess, night school, community college? The condescension was designed to humiliate, to put her in her place. Clara felt her face flush, but she held his gaze. Columbia, she said quietly. 2 years. Contracts, corporate structure, securities law. I didn't finish, but I learned enough to recognize predatory lending when it's dressed up as partnership. Something flickered in Vale's expression. Surprise, maybe. Reevaluation. David had gone very still, the contract clutched in his hands. Mr. Vale, is what she's saying accurate? Legal documents are complex, David. They require sophisticated understanding. Is it accurate? David's voice was harder now, angry. Vale's jaw tightened. The clause she's referencing is a protective mechanism that ensures, yes or no, if my company succeeds, do you take 85%? The silence stretched. The triggering event is based on very specific metrics that, yes or no. Vale's expression went cold. Business is about leverage, David. I'm offering you capital you desperately need. That capital comes with terms that protect my investment. If you can't understand basic risk allocation, perhaps you're not ready to run a company worth $50 million. So yes. David stood up, and there was something new in his posture, something that hadn't been there before. You were going to trick me. I was going to invest in you. The fact that you lack the sophistication to understand corporate finance, get out. The words came from David Chen, but they carried weight that surprised everyone, possibly including David himself. Excuse me? Vale's voice was ice. I said, get out. David picked up the contract and in one smooth motion, tore it in half. You're not investing in TerraStream. You're not partnering with me. You're not getting anywhere near my company. For a moment, Clara thought Vale might do something violent. His hands clenched at his sides, his face flushing with rage barely held in check. You're making a tremendous mistake, he said, voice shaking slightly. Without my funding, you're finished, dead in the water, and I will personally ensure that every investor in this city knows you're unreliable, ungrateful, and incapable of basic business judgment. That's fine. David's voice was steady now. I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on yours. Vale turned to Clara then, and his smile was pure poison. And you. I hope whatever moral victory you think you just won was worth it, because I'm going to make sure you never work in this city again. Not here, not anywhere. I'll have you blacklisted from every restaurant, every catering company, every food service job from here to Brooklyn. I'm already fired, Clara said quietly. You can't really make it worse. Watch me. He turned and walked out of Aurelius, each step measured and controlled despite the fury radiating off him like heat. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Clara realized in the sudden silence that her entire body was shaking. Marcus was staring at her with an expression that mixed horror and reluctant admiration. What the hell did you just do? I have no idea, Clara whispered. David Chen stood holding the torn halves of the contract, looking like someone who'd just survived a car accident. His eyes met Clara's across the restaurant. Thank you, he said. I don't even know what to say except thank you. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Clara, my office, Marcus said. Now. She followed him through the kitchen, past the prep stations where line cooks pretended not to watch, into the cramped office that smelled like paperwork and old coffee. Marcus closed the door and leaned against his desk, rubbing his eyes. Do you understand what you just cost me? He asked. Vale's assistant called 3 days ago, told me he wanted absolute privacy, perfect service, and no interruptions for what he called a delicate business discussion. I guaranteed it. I promised that nothing would go wrong. I'm sorry, Clara said, and meant it. I didn't plan to... You publicly humiliated one of the most powerful men in Manhattan, in my restaurant. Do you think he's going to come back? Do you think any of his associates will eat here after tonight? Marcus shook his head. The owner is going to lose his mind when he hears about this. I know. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. It's done. Marcus pulled an envelope from his desk drawer. Her final paycheck, probably. You were a good server, Clara. Reliable, professional. Whatever happened to you before you came here, I always figured it was something big, something that hurt. Clara took the envelope, her hands still shaking. But you can't save everyone, Marcus continued. You certainly can't save them if you can't even save yourself. That guy, David, he's going to forget your name in a week, and you're going to be out of work in a city that's already too expensive to survive in. I know. Do you? Because you just threw away one of the steadiest jobs you're going to find. For what? A stranger? A principal? Clara didn't have an answer. Marcus sighed. Get your things. And Clara, whatever happens next, I hope it works out. I really do. She collected her coat from the staff closet, untied her apron for the last time, and walked out through the kitchen. The cold November air hit her like a slap when she pushed through the back door into the alley. She'd been fired before, twice actually, during the chaotic first year of her father's illness, when she couldn't keep schedules straight. But this felt different, more final. She pulled out her phone, staring at the screen without really seeing it. Her bank account showed $847. Rent was due in 5 days, $1,200 that she no longer had any way to pay. Her father's next treatment was scheduled for Wednesday, another $2,800 that insurance wouldn't cover. The math was simple and devastating. She'd saved David Chen from a predatory contract and destroyed herself in the process. Clara was halfway down the alley, trying to figure out which subway would get her back to her apartment fastest, when she heard footsteps behind her. Wait! She turned. David Chen stood in the mouth of the alley, still holding his leather portfolio, breath misting in the cold air. I'm sorry, Clara said automatically. I didn't mean to ruin your... You saved me. David walked closer, and in the dim light from the street, she could see he'd been crying. I was about to sign that. I was so desperate, so scared that I was about to give up everything I've worked for, and you stopped me. Anyone would have... No, they wouldn't have. He laughed, sharp and bitter. Do you know how many people saw me in there tonight? The other servers, the diners, the manager. Everyone watched Vale corner me, watched him pressure me, and nobody said a word. Because it wasn't their problem. Because it was safer to stay quiet. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. I don't think safe is really my specialty. What's your name? Your full name? Clara Hayes. Clara Hayes. David said it like he was memorizing it. You told me you went to Columbia Law? For 2 years. I didn't finish. Why not? The question was gentle, but it still hurt. Family emergency. My father got sick. The medical bills were... I had to work. I couldn't do both. David nodded slowly, processing. Do you still want to practice law? The question caught her off guard. I don't know, maybe. Probably. But I can't afford to go back, and I don't even know if... TerraStream needs a lawyer, David interrupted. Not right now. We can barely pay the engineers. But if we survive the next few months, if we find actual legitimate funding, we're going to need someone who understands contracts, someone who can protect us from people like Vale. Clara stared at him. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a maybe, a possibility. David pulled a business card from his portfolio, scribbled something on the back. This is my cell. Call me in a week. We'll figure something out. And Clara? Yeah? Thank you for having the courage I didn't. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the Tribeca night. Clara stood alone in the alley, holding a business card, unemployed and broke and terrified. But for the first time in 3 years, something that might have been hope flickered in her chest. It wasn't much. It might not even survive until morning. But it was there. She put the card in her pocket and started walking. The subway ride back to Washington Heights took 43 minutes, and Clara spent every one of them staring at David Chen's business card like it might vanish if she looked away. The train was nearly empty at this hour. Just her, a couple of teenagers sharing earbuds, and a man in a security uniform sleeping against the window. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of exhaustion that only existed underground. She should have felt relieved, triumphant even. She'd stopped something ugly from happening, had used skills she'd thought were dead and buried to actually help someone. Instead, she felt hollowed out, scraped clean. Her phone buzzed. A text from her roommate, Jess. Rent's due Friday. You good? Clara typed back, yeah, all set, and hated herself for the lie. The apartment she shared with Jess was a 4th-floor walk-up with water damage in the bathroom and a radiator that only worked when it felt like it. But it was $1,200 a month split 2 ways, which in Manhattan was practically charity. Jess worked as a paralegal at a firm in Midtown and had the kind of stable, sensible life that Clara had once been on track for. Before everything fell apart, she climbed the stairs slowly, each step reminding her that she'd been on her feet for 6 hours before the night had exploded. The hallway smelled like someone's attempt at cooking fish and failing. Their door stuck like it always did, requiring a specific combination of lifting and shoving that Clara had memorized through repetition. Jess was on the couch, laptop open, still in her work clothes, minus the heels that sat abandoned by the door. You're home early, she said without looking up. Slow night? Clara hung her coat on the hook that was slowly pulling out of the wall. Something like that. There's leftover pad thai in the fridge if you want. Jess looked up and stopped mid-sentence. What happened? Nothing. I'm fine. Clara, your face is doing that thing where you're trying to hold it together and failing. What happened? Clara sat down on the opposite end of the couch, suddenly exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. I got fired. What? Why? I stopped a billionaire from screwing over some kid with a predatory contract in the middle of dinner service, very loudly. Jess closed her laptop slowly. You're joking. I'm really not. Clara, Jesus Christ, why would you... Jess stopped herself, took a breath. Okay, start from the beginning. So Clara told her. The whole thing, from Ethan Vale's arrival to David Chen's torn contract, to Marcus's quiet disappointment as he'd handed her the final paycheck. Jess listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through disbelief, horror, and something that might have been reluctant admiration. That's the most incredibly stupid thing I've ever heard, Jess said when Clara finished, and also kind of amazing, but mostly stupid. I know. Do you? Because you just torched a steady job in an economy where people are fighting over barista positions. For a stranger, who you'll probably never see again. Clara pulled out David's business card. He gave me this, said maybe there'd be a job if his company survives. Jess took the card, examined it like it might be counterfeit. TerraStream Technologies, cute logo, very startup. She handed it back. Clara, you know what maybe means in startup world? It means no. It means he felt guilty for approximately 10 minutes, gave you his card to feel better about himself, and by next week he'll have forgotten you exist. Maybe. Definitely. Jess softened her tone. Look, I get it. You saw something wrong and you couldn't stay quiet. That's very you, very noble, but nobility doesn't pay rent. What are you going to do about Friday? Clara had been avoiding thinking about Friday. I'll figure something out. With what money? I have some savings. You have $800. I know, because you told me last week when you were trying to decide if you could afford your dad's next treatment. Jess leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I can cover your half this month, maybe next month too. But Clara, you need to find another job. Fast. The kindness in the offer made Clara's throat tight. I can't let you. You can and you will. We'll call it a loan. You can pay me back when you're a fancy corporate lawyer making 6 figures. Jess smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Just promise me you'll actually look for work. Real work. Not waiting for some startup kids maybe to turn into something real. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling where a water stain had formed a shape that looked disturbingly like a face. Her phone sat on the nightstand, David's card propped against it. She should throw it away. Jess was right. Maybes from grateful strangers didn't turn into careers. They turned into awkward follow-up conversations where both parties pretended to remember each other before making polite excuses. But she didn't throw it away. The next morning, Clara woke to 17 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. Her first thought was hospital. Something had happened to her father, some new crisis, some complication that insurance wouldn't cover and she couldn't afford. She called back with shaking hands. Clara Hayes? The voice was male, clipped, professional. This is James Whitmore. I'm an attorney with Morrison, Chase, and Heller. Her stomach dropped. Okay. I represent Ethan Vale. Mr. Vale has asked me to inform you that he intends to pursue legal action regarding your conduct last night at Aurelius Restaurant, specifically tortious interference with a business relationship, defamation, and… Wait, what? Clara sat up so fast her head spun. I didn't defame anyone. I pointed out a clause in a contract that you made false and damaging statements about my client's business practices in a public setting, causing significant harm to his reputation and resulting in the loss of a substantial investment opportunity. Clara's legal training kicked in, rusty but functional. The statements weren't false. The acceleration clause was real. I can prove whether the clause existed is irrelevant. You had no standing to involve yourself in a private business negotiation. You exceeded your role as service staff and caused measurable financial damage to my client. Is this a joke? I assure you it's not. Mr. Vale takes his reputation very seriously. Whitmore's tone suggested he'd had this conversation before, many times. We're prepared to file suit unless you agree to certain terms. What terms? A public apology, issued both verbally and in writing, acknowledging that you overstepped your bounds and mischaracterized Mr. Vale's business practices. Additionally, you'll sign a non-disparagement agreement preventing you from discussing the incident with anyone, including media outlets or social media platforms. Clara laughed. It came out sharper than she'd intended. You're threatening to sue me unless I apologize for telling the truth? We're offering you an opportunity to resolve this matter without costly litigation that you almost certainly cannot afford. The threat was clear. Vale had done his research, knew she was broke, knew she couldn't fight back. And if I refuse, then we'll see you in court. Discovery will be extensive. Depositions, document requests, the full process. It typically takes 18 to 24 months. Legal fees for the defendant in cases like this average around $75,000. $75,000. The number sat in Clara's chest like a stone. I need time to think about this, she managed. You have until 5 p.m. today. After that, we file. Whitmore paused. Ms. Hayes, I've handled cases like this before. Mr. Vale doesn't bluff. He will pursue this to the fullest extent, and he will win because he has resources you don't. Save yourself the trouble. Sign the agreement. The line went dead. Clara sat on her bed, phone clutched in her hand, trying to breathe through the panic rising in her throat. This couldn't be happening. She'd done the right thing. She'd helped someone. And now she was being threatened with legal action she couldn't possibly defend against. She called Jess, who picked up on the first ring. Can Vale actually sue me for this? Clara asked without preamble. What? Slow down. What are you talking about? Clara explained about Whitmore's call, the threatened lawsuit, the deadline. Jess listened in silence. Technically, yes, he can sue you, Jess said finally. Tortious interference is a real thing. Whether he'd win is another question, but that doesn't matter. He doesn't need to win. He just needs to bury you in legal fees until you give up. So what do I do? Sign the agreement, apologize, move on. Jess's voice was gentle but firm. Clara, you can't fight this. You don't have the money or the resources. And even if you did, what would you win? The satisfaction of being right? That doesn't pay bills. Clara knew Jess was right, knew it with perfect clarity. But the thought of apologizing, of saying Vale had done nothing wrong when she knew exactly what he'd tried to do, made her physically sick. I need to think, Clara said. Don't think too long. You have until 5. Clara spent the rest of the morning walking. She didn't have anywhere to go, no job to get to, so she just walked. Through Riverside Park, where early morning joggers huffed past her with the kind of determination that suggested they were running from something. Down to the Hudson, where the water looked gray and cold under overcast skies. Her phone rang again around 11. Another unknown number. Clara Hayes? This voice was younger, uncertain. This is David Chen from last night. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Relief flooded through her. It's fine. Hi. I wanted to check in, see how you were doing. I heard about what happened at the restaurant, that you lost your job. I feel terrible about that. It's not your fault. It kind of is, though. If I hadn't been stupid enough to almost sign that contract. You weren't stupid. You were desperate. There's a difference. Clara watched a barge move slowly up the river. And anyway, I made my own choice. Still, David hesitated. Look, I know I said to call me in a week, but I've been thinking, TerraStream doesn't have much money right now. Like, embarrassingly little money. But I could probably scrape together enough to cover a few weeks of consulting fees. If you're interested. Clara's heart jumped. Consulting on what? Legal stuff. I need to find actual legitimate funding, which means I need to understand what I'm signing before I sign it. And clearly I'm not great at that on my own. He laughed, self-deprecating. It wouldn't be much, maybe a few hundred a week, but it's something? A few hundred a week. It wasn't Aurelius money, but it was better than nothing, better than unemployment. That would be helpful, Clara said carefully. But David, I need to be honest with you. I didn't finish law school. I'm not licensed to practice. I can review contracts and give you my opinion, but I can't officially represent you in any legal capacity. I'm not asking you to represent me. I'm asking you to help me understand what I'm reading. Make sure I don't get screwed again. Clara made a decision. Okay, yes. I'm interested. Great. Can you come by the office tomorrow? I use the word office loosely. It's actually a co-working space in Brooklyn that I rent by the hour. But we can sit down, I'll show you what I'm working with, and we can figure out next steps. I'll be there. David gave her the address, and they hung up. Clara stood by the river, phone in hand, feeling like maybe she could breathe again. Then her phone buzzed with a text from the same number that had called that morning. This is James Whitmore, confirming you received my earlier message. Agreement must be signed by 5 p.m. or we file suit. Please acknowledge. The brief moment of relief evaporated. She had a choice to make. Sign Vale's agreement, apologize for telling the truth, and accept whatever work David could offer. Or refuse, get sued, and watch everything collapse under legal fees she couldn't pay. There was no good option, just varying degrees of bad. Clara texted back. Received, still considering. The response came immediately. Don't take too long. Clock is ticking. She went to visit her father that afternoon. He lived in a care facility in the Bronx that was clean and competent and absolutely crushing in its monthly cost. The experimental treatment he was receiving, an immunotherapy trial for the aggressive form of MS that was slowly stealing his ability to walk, to speak, to exist without pain, wasn't covered by his retirement insurance. Clara had been paying for it out of pocket, draining the small savings he'd built up over 30 years of teaching history to high school students who mostly didn't care. He was in the common room when she arrived, sitting in the wheelchair he'd resisted for months before finally accepting he needed it. A book sat open in his lap. Something about the Civil War, probably. He'd spent his entire career teaching Reconstruction and had never quite moved on from it. Clara. His smile was lopsided, his speech slightly slurred. The MS affected his facial muscles. Wasn't expecting you today. Had some free time. She sat in the chair beside him, took his hand. How are you feeling? Like garbage, but that's not new. He squeezed her fingers with what strength he had left. How's work? She should tell him she'd been fired, should explain the whole situation. But looking at him, at what was left of the man who'd raised her alone after her mother died, who'd worked 2 jobs to save for her college education, who'd been so proud when she got into Columbia, she couldn't make the words come out. It's fine, she lied. Busy. You look tired. I'm always tired. That's not the same as being okay. He studied her with eyes that had spent decades reading reluctant students. Something's wrong. Nothing's wrong. Clara, I taught teenagers for 30 years. I know what lying looks like. She broke. Not dramatically, not with tears or confession, but quietly. I lost my job at the restaurant last night. He listened as she explained, his expression shifting from concern to understanding to something that might have been pride. You stood up for someone, he said when she finished. That takes courage. It was stupid. Jess is right. I can't afford courage. Nobody can afford courage. That's why it matters. He shifted in his wheelchair, wincing. When I was teaching, I had a student once, bright kid, scholarship potential, who got caught up in a cheating scandal. The whole class had access to a stolen exam, and they all used it. Every single one. This kid knew it was wrong, but he also knew that not using it meant failing while everyone else passed. What did he do? Reported it. Got this whole class investigated. Made himself the most hated person in school. Her father smiled. Also got into Yale on early admission because his integrity essay was genuinely earned. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you. But Clara, if you only do right when it's convenient, you're not really doing right at all. Yale didn't have legal fees. No, but principals do. He squeezed her hand again. What are you going to do? I don't know. Yes, you do. You're going to tell that billionaire to go to hell, you're going to figure out a way to survive, and you're going to keep being the person I raised you to be. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I can't afford a lawsuit, Dad. Then you'll lose, but you'll lose standing up. He touched her face, his hand shaking slightly. I've got maybe 2 years left if this treatment keeps working. Less if it doesn't. I don't want to spend that time watching you compromise yourself into someone I don't recognize. The treatment costs money I won't have if I get sued. Then I'll stop the treatment. Dad, I mean it. I'd rather die as myself than live watching you destroy yourself to keep me comfortable. His voice was firm despite the slur. You think I don't know what you've sacrificed? Law school, your future, everything you worked for. I see it every time you visit. And it kills me. I chose this. And now I'm choosing to tell you it's enough. Fight your fight, Clara. Win or lose, fight it. And stop using me as an excuse not to. They sat in silence for a while after that, just holding hands in the common room while other residents watched television or slept or stared at nothing in particular. When Clara left, she felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but clarity. It was 3:30 when she got back to Manhattan, an hour and a half until Whitmore's deadline. She went to a coffee shop she couldn't really afford, bought a latte she definitely couldn't afford, and sat down with her phone. First, she called David Chen. Hey, he answered on the second ring. Everything okay? I need to ask you something. Last night, when you tore up that contract, were you scared? Terrified. Still am, actually. I have no idea how I'm going to keep the company running. But you did it anyway. Because you showed me I had to. That sometimes the safe choice is actually the most dangerous one. He paused. Why are you asking? Clara explained about Whitmore's call, the lawsuit threat, the deadline. That's insane, David said when she finished. He's actually going to sue you for telling me the truth? Apparently. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell him no. I'm going to refuse to sign his agreement, and I'm going to let him sue me, and I'm probably going to lose everything. Clara surprised herself by laughing, which is objectively the stupidest decision I could make, but I think it's the right one. You're sure? Not even a little bit, but I'm doing it anyway. Then you're going to need a lawyer, David said. A real one. I can't afford. I know someone. Friend from college who went into corporate defense. She owes me a favor, and I'm calling it in. Let me reach out. David, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. You saved my company. Least I can do is try to save you from the consequences. After they hung up, Clara sat with her cooling latte and thought about courage, about principle, about the difference between what was smart and what was right. At 4:55 p.m., she called James Whitmore. Ms. Hayes, he answered smoothly, cutting it close. I'm not signing your agreement. Silence on the other end. Then, I would strongly advise you to reconsider. I'm sure you would, but my answer is no. If Mr. Vale wants to sue me for telling the truth, he can go ahead. You understand what this means? The legal fees alone will bankrupt you. Probably, but at least I'll be bankrupt with a clear conscience. That's remarkably naive. Maybe. Or maybe it's the first smart thing I've done in 3 years. Clara felt strangely calm. See you in court, Mr. Whitmore. She hung up before he could respond. Her phone immediately started buzzing with calls from the same number. She declined them all, blocked the number, and finished her latte. Jess called 10 minutes later. Please tell me you signed the agreement, she said without preamble. I didn't. Clara, for the love of... Why? Because my dad's right. If I only do the right thing when it's convenient, I'm not really doing the right thing at all. Your dad is dying and on experimental treatment that costs a fortune. He's not exactly objective. He told me to stop the treatment if I needed to. Said he'd rather die as himself than watch me compromise into someone he doesn't recognize. Jess was quiet for a long moment. That's either the most beautiful thing I've ever heard or the most manipulative. It's both, but it's also true. Clara watched traffic move past the coffee shop window. I can't apologize for this, Jess. I can't say Vale did nothing wrong when I know exactly what he tried to do. So you're just going to let him destroy you? I'm going to fight. And probably lose, but at least I'll lose honestly. Another long silence. Then Jess sighed. You're the most frustrating person I've ever met. I know. I'm serious. You make terrible decisions, financially catastrophic decisions. I know. And I'm still going to cover your rent, because you're also kind of inspiring in a deeply idiotic way. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just try not to get evicted before you figure out whatever comes next. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed scrolling through her phone, reading about Ethan Vale. There was a lot to read. He'd built his first company at 24, sold it for $80 million at 26, and used that money to launch Vale Equity. His track record was impressive. 32 successful investments, only 4 failures, an average return of 400%. He sat on boards, gave TED Talks, appeared regularly on financial news programs discussing market trends and startup ecosystems. And buried in the background, if you knew where to look, were the whispers. Founders who'd sold their companies to Vale and somehow ended up with nothing. Startups that had taken his funding and imploded within months. NDAs and settlements and carefully worded statements about mutual agreement to part ways. David Chen hadn't been Vale's first target, just his most recent. Clara dug deeper, following threads from one article to another, cross-referencing names and dates. A pattern emerged. Vale specialized in desperate founders, people backed into corners, running out of runway, willing to accept terms they didn't fully understand. And he was careful. Everything was technically legal, documented, signed. He just happened to be much better at reading contracts than the people signing them. She found an interview from 2 years ago where Vale discussed his investment philosophy. Business is about leverage, he said, smiling at the camera with perfect teeth and empty eyes. You find people who need something and you give it to them, but you make sure the terms benefit you. That's not predatory. That's just smart. Clara screenshot the quote and saved it to her phone. Around 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with an email from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, Vale versus Hayes. She opened it, heart pounding. Ms. Hayes, my name is Patricia Zhao. David Chen reached out to me regarding your situation. I'm a corporate defense attorney with Canton and Reed. I've reviewed the basic facts of your case, and I'd like to offer my services pro bono. I've dealt with Ethan Vale before. Different case, similar tactics. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss strategy. Best, Patricia. Clara read the email 3 times, trying to find the catch. Lawyers didn't work for free, especially not corporate defense lawyers at firms fancy enough to have three names. But David had said his friend owed him a favor. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone in this. She replied, "Thank you. I'll call tomorrow morning." Then she finally fell asleep, phone clutched in her hand, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite hope. Not yet. But possibility. Patricia Zhao's office was on the 42nd floor of a building in the financial district that probably had better security than most government facilities. Clara had to sign in at 3 different checkpoints, get photographed twice, and wear a visitor badge that felt like it weighed 10 pounds. The reception area had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a receptionist who smiled with the kind of professional warmth that suggested she'd been trained extensively in making people feel simultaneously welcome and inadequate. "Ms. Hayes?" The receptionist's voice was honey over ice. "Ms. Zhao is ready for you. Conference room C, down the hall to your left." Clara followed the directions, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished marble floor. Everyone else in the hallway wore shoes that cost more than her entire outfit. She felt like an imposter, which was probably accurate. Patricia Zhao was younger than Clara had expected, maybe 35 with sharp eyes behind designer glasses and a handshake that could crack walnuts. "Clara, good to meet you." She gestured to a chair at a conference table that could seat 20. "Coffee? Water? Something stronger?" "Water's fine." Patricia poured from a carafe that probably cost more than Clara's security deposit, then sat down across from her with a legal pad and what looked like a 2-inch thick file. "So, Ethan Vale wants to sue you for telling the truth." Patricia's smile was knife-sharp. "That's very on-brand for him." "You've dealt with him before?" "Twice. Different cases, same playbook. He finds someone vulnerable, pressures them into a corner, and when they fight back, he buries them in litigation." Patricia flipped open the file. "The good news is that his cases are usually garbage, technically legal threats, but practically unwinnable. The bad news is that he doesn't care about winning, he cares about the process." Clara took a sip of water that tasted better than water had any right to taste. "I don't understand. He's not trying to win a judgment against you. He's trying to make your life so miserable and expensive that you give up. File a lawsuit, drag it through discovery, depose you 17 times, request every document you've touched in the last decade. Most people can't afford to fight that, so they settle. Sign an NDA, issue an apology, disappear." That's what his lawyer wanted me to do. Of course it is. James Whitmore's entire job is to make people fold before they ever see a courtroom. Patricia made a note on her legal pad. But here's the thing about Vale's strategy. It only works if you're isolated. If you're fighting alone with no resources and no support, he wins by attrition. But if you have actual legal representation, someone who knows how to counter his tactics, the case falls apart pretty quickly. And you're offering to be that representation? Pro bono, which I'm sure seems suspicious. "A little bit, yeah." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "David Chen and I went to MIT together. We were lab partners for 3 semesters, and he basically carried me through thermodynamics when I was trying to figure out if I wanted to be an engineer or go to law school. I owe him. More importantly, I really don't like Ethan Vale. Personal, professional. I represented a founder 2 years ago that Vale tried to acquire. Same pressure tactics, same artificial deadlines, same predatory contract terms. We fought back, exposed what he was doing, and the deal collapsed. Vale tried to sue my client for defamation." Patricia's smile went cold. "We countersued for fraud and intentional misrepresentation. He settled within 3 months and signed an NDA, preventing him from discussing the case." Clara felt something loosen in her chest. "So this is revenge?" "This is pattern evidence. If I can demonstrate that Vale has a history of predatory behavior, it undermines his entire lawsuit against you. You're not a rogue waitress making false accusations. You're someone who recognized a pattern and intervened." Patricia tapped her pen against the legal pad. "But I need you to be honest with me about something." "Okay. Can you handle this? Because it's going to get ugly. Vale's going to come after you hard. He'll dig into your background, your finances, your personal life. He'll try to paint you as unstable, opportunistic, someone with an axe to grind. Discovery is going to feel invasive and humiliating. Depositions are going to be hostile. And there's a very real chance we lose anyway, because the law doesn't always care about what's right. Clara thought about her father in his wheelchair, about David Chen's torn contract, about 3 years of making herself small and invisible and safe. I can handle it, she said. Patricia studied her for a long moment. You sure? Because once we file a response, there's no backing out. You're committed. I'm sure. Then we fight. Patricia pulled out a stack of documents. Let's start with what they've actually filed. The complaint alleges tortious interference, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's a kitchen sink approach. Throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. Our response needs to be surgical. They worked for 3 hours straight, Patricia walking Clara through every element of Vale's complaint and explaining exactly how they'd counter each one. Tortious interference required Clara to have acted with improper motive, but warning someone about a predatory contract was protective, not malicious. Defamation required false statements, but everything Clara said about the acceleration clause was demonstrably true. Intentional infliction of emotional distress required extreme and outrageous conduct, but speaking up in a public restaurant didn't meet that threshold. The weakest part of his case is also the most dangerous, Patricia explained. He's arguing that you had no business involving yourself in a private negotiation, that you exceeded your role as service staff and caused him financial harm. But I was right about the contract. Being right isn't a legal defense if you didn't have standing to intervene. It's like if you saw someone signing a bad insurance policy and you tackled them to stop them. You might have saved them from a mistake, but you still committed assault. Clara's stomach dropped. So he might actually win? He might, or the judge might dismiss the whole thing as frivolous, or we might settle somewhere in the middle. Patricia closed the file. But here's what I know about Ethan Vale. He's used to people folding. He's used to getting his way through intimidation and superior resources. The moment you actually fight back with competent representation, he loses the only advantage he really has. Which is? Fear. Clara left the office feeling simultaneously more confident and more terrified. Patricia had given her homework, a detailed timeline of the events at Aurelius, copies of any documents she had, contact information for potential witnesses. It felt strange to be preparing for a legal fight using skills she'd thought were dead and buried. Her phone rang as she was walking to the subway. Unknown number, but she answered anyway. Clara Hayes? The voice was female, young, uncertain. This is Rachel Kwan. I'm a reporter with the Manhattan Business Journal. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about Ethan Vale. Clara stopped walking. How did you get this number? I have sources at Morrison, Chase, and Heller. They've been talking about Vale's lawsuit against a waitress who interfered with one of his deals. That's you, right? I'm not talking to reporters. I understand. But here's the thing. I've been investigating Vale for 6 months. I have 3 other founders willing to go on record about similar experiences. Predatory contracts, pressure tactics, systematic exploitation. But they're all bound by NDAs, so they can't say much without risking their own lawsuits. Clara resumed walking, phone pressed to her ear. What does this have to do with me? You're not bound by an NDA. You refused to sign Vale's agreement, which means you're the first person in years who can actually talk about what he does. Rachel's voice gained intensity. I know you're in the middle of a lawsuit. I know this is risky. But if you're willing to go on record, tell your story publicly, it changes the entire narrative. You're not a defendant. You're a whistleblower. I'm really not. You exposed a predatory business practice. You sacrificed your job to protect someone. That's literally the definition of whistleblowing. Clara reached the subway entrance, hesitated. I need to think about this. Of course. But Clara, Vale's entire strategy depends on people being too scared to speak up. If you break that silence, if you show other people they don't have to be afraid of him, it undermines everything he's built. Or it makes me look like I'm trying to get publicity out of this, like I have an agenda. You do have an agenda. It's called telling the truth. Rachel paused. Look, I'm not asking you to decide right now. Think about it. Talk to your lawyer, but if you change your mind, call me. Clara hung up and descended into the subway, Rachel's words echoing in her head. The next few weeks developed a rhythm that felt like slowly drowning. Clara spent mornings at TerraStream's co-working space, reviewing contracts and investor proposals with David while trying to remember everything she'd once known about corporate law. Afternoons were devoted to her own case, working with Patricia to build their defense against Vale's lawsuit. Evenings she spent applying for jobs that never called back, her termination from Aurelius apparently more visible than she'd hoped. Money became an abstract concept that caused physical pain. Jess covered rent like she'd promised, but Clara still needed food, subway fare, phone service. Her bank account dwindled steadily. $847 became $612, became $423, became $187. Her father's next treatment came due. Clara called the facility and explained she needed more time. "We can give you 2 weeks," the administrator said with professional sympathy that felt like a knife. "After that, we'll have to pause treatment until the account is current." 2 weeks. 14 days to find money she didn't have. David tried to help, scraping together consulting fees that Clara suspected came from his personal savings rather than TerraStream's nearly empty bank account. It wasn't enough, but it was something. "I feel like I'm watching you self-destruct," he said one afternoon while they reviewed a term sheet from a venture capital firm in Boston. "Is there anything I can actually do?" "You're already doing it. This job is keeping me barely afloat." "Barely afloat isn't a sustainable life strategy." Clara laughed without humor. "It's all I've got." The venture capital firm, Beacon Partners, had reached out to David after hearing about his confrontation with Vale. Apparently word traveled fast in startup circles, and a founder who'd publicly rejected Vale's offer was either admirably principled or commercially naive, depending on who you asked. Their proposed terms were cleaner than Vale's, but still aggressive. 40% equity for $12 million in Series A funding, with standard anti-dilution protections and board representation. It was a real offer, professional and serious. "What do you think?" David asked, watching Clara's face as she read. "I think it's legitimate. The anti-dilution clause is industry standard, not predatory. Board representation makes sense given their investment size. The valuation seems fair based on where you are in development. But nothing. This is what a real investment offer looks like. You should take it." David sat back, ran his hands through his hair. "If I take this, I can hire you properly. Not consulting fees, actual salary, benefits, the whole thing." "David, I mean it. TerraStream needs a general counsel, someone who understands contracts and can protect us from people like Vale." "You're already doing the work. Let me actually pay you for it." The offer was tempting in a way that made Clara's chest ache. A real job, a salary, a future that didn't involve slowly starving while fighting a lawsuit she couldn't afford. "Let me think about it," she said. "What's to think about? Whether I'm qualified, whether I can actually do this without a law degree. You stopped me from signing away my company. You're reviewing contracts for me right now and catching things I'd never see. You're more qualified than half the lawyers I've talked to." David leaned forward. "Clara, you saved me. Let me return the favor." That night, Clara lay in bed scrolling through her phone, reading about Ethan Vale's latest public appearance. He'd given a keynote at a tech conference in San Francisco, discussing the future of impact investing and responsible entrepreneurship. The video was professionally shot, his delivery smooth and confident. "Too many startups fail because founders don't understand the business fundamentals," he said to a rapt audience. "My job is to provide not just capital, but guidance, partnership. I invest in people, not just ideas." The comment section was full of praise. Visionary, inspiring, exactly what the startup ecosystem needs. Nobody knew about the acceleration clause, about the systematic exploitation, about the pattern of behavior that Patricia was documenting in preparation for their defense. Clara's phone buzzed with an email from Patricia. "Deposition scheduled for Thursday, 2 p.m. Morrison Chase offices. Be prepared for Whitmore to be extremely hostile. Don't answer anything without checking with me first." The deposition. The formal process where Vale's lawyers would question her under oath, trying to trap her into contradictions or admissions that would undermine their case. Patricia had prepared her extensively, but Clara still felt sick thinking about it. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Rachel Kwan. "Still thinking about my offer. I'm publishing the Vale investigation in 3 weeks regardless. Would be stronger with your voice included." Clara stared at the message for a long time before replying, still thinking. The deposition took place in a conference room that was clearly designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat 40, and enough recording equipment to film a documentary. James Whitmore sat across from Clara, with two associates flanking him like bookends. Patricia sat to Clara's right, legal pad ready, expression unreadable. The court reporter, a woman in her 50s with perfect posture, positioned her fingers over the stenography machine and waited. "Let's begin," Whitmore said, his smile sharp enough to cut. "Ms. Hayes, please state your full name for the record." "Clara Marie Hayes." "And Ms. Hayes, do you understand that you're under oath, that perjury carries criminal penalties?" "I understand." "Good. Let's talk about the evening of November 14th. You were working as a server at Aurelius Restaurant, correct?" "Yes." "And your job responsibilities included serving food and beverages to patrons?" "Yes." "Did they include providing legal advice to patrons?" Patricia interrupted before Clara could respond. "Objection. Argumentative and assumes facts not in evidence." Whitmore's smile didn't falter. "I'll rephrase. Ms. Hayes, were you hired by Aurelius to provide legal consultation services to restaurant guests?" "No." "Were you acting in any official legal capacity on the evening in question?" "No." "So when you approached my client's table and began discussing contract law with Mr. Chen, you were exceeding your job responsibilities?" Clara felt her jaw tighten. "I was trying to help someone." "By interfering in a private business negotiation?" "By pointing out a clause that he might not have understood." "And you felt qualified to interpret complex legal documents despite not having a law degree?" Patricia leaned forward. "Don't answer that. It's outside the scope of relevant inquiry." Whitmore made a note. "Ms. Hayes, had you ever met David Chen before that evening?" "No." "Had you ever met my client, Ethan Vale, before that evening?" "No." "So you had no prior relationship with either party involved in this negotiation?" "Correct." "Then what motivated you to involve yourself?" Clara met his eyes. "I saw something wrong, and I spoke up." "You saw what you perceived as wrong, but you had no way of knowing the full context of the negotiation, did you?" "I knew what the contract said." "You read a 40-page investment agreement while serving tables?" "I read enough. Enough to form a professional legal opinion? Enough to accuse my client of fraud in a public setting?" "I never used the word fraud." Whitmore shuffled through his papers with deliberate slowness. "You told Mr. Chen that Mr. Vale was trying to trick him. Is that correct?" Clara glanced at Patricia, who nodded slightly. "I told him the contract contained terms that weren't what they appeared to be." "In your expert legal opinion?" "In my observation as someone who studied contract law." "At Columbia, correct? For 2 years before dropping out?" The words landed like a slap. Patricia's hand tightened on her pen, but she didn't object. The question was technically relevant to establishing Clara's credentials. "I didn't drop out. I took a leave of absence for family reasons." "And never returned?" "No." "So you have no law degree, no bar admission, no formal legal credentials of any kind?" "No." "Yet you felt comfortable making definitive statements about the legal implications of a complex investment agreement." "I felt comfortable reading what was written in plain English and explaining it to someone who was about to sign away his company." Whitmore leaned back, satisfied. "Let's talk about what happened after your intervention. Mr. Vale left the restaurant, correct?" "Yes." "And you were terminated from your employment?" "Yes." "Have you found subsequent employment?" Patricia objected. "Relevance? It goes to damages and potential motives for Ms. Hayes' actions." The judge wasn't present for a deposition, so Patricia couldn't get a ruling, but she noted her objection for the record. Clara answered, "I'm working as a consultant." "For whom?" "TerraStream Technologies." Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "David Chen's company? The same David Chen you claim to have been protecting that evening?" "Yes." "So you intervened in his negotiation, cost my client a substantial investment opportunity, and then secured employment with Mr. Chen's company?" Whitmore's tone dripped with implication. "That seems remarkably convenient." "The consulting arrangement came after the incident." "How long after?" "A few days." "And how much is Mr. Chen paying you?" Patricia objected again. "This is fishing, and you know it, James. It's establishing potential financial motive for Ms. Hayes to interfere with my client's business relationships." Clara felt her face flush. "I'm not answering questions about my personal finances. You'll answer what the court compels you to answer." Whitmore made another note. "Let's move on. Ms. Hayes, have you spoken to any media representatives about this incident? The question caught Clara off guard. She thought about Rachel Kwan's phone call, the voicemail messages she'd ignored. I've been contacted by reporters. I haven't given any interviews. But you've been contacted? How many times? I don't know. A few. And what did these reporters want to discuss? The incident at Aurelius. Mr. Vale's business practices. His business practices? Whitmore leaned forward. So you've been discussing my client's confidential business methods with media representatives? I just said I haven't given interviews. But you've discussed it? Even if not for publication? Patricia's hand came down on the table. Okay, we're done. This is harassment, not discovery. Unless you have relevant questions about the specific incident in question, we're terminating this deposition. Whitmore smiled. I have plenty of relevant questions, like whether Ms. Hayes has a history of inserting herself into situations where she doesn't belong, whether she has a pattern of overestimating her expertise, whether her financial desperation made her susceptible to manipulation by Mr. Chen. You're building a narrative, not seeking facts. Patricia stood up. We'll see you in court, James. This deposition is over. They left Morrison Chase's offices in tense silence. Patricia didn't speak until they were in the elevator, descending toward the lobby. That was ugly, she said finally. I know. He's going to paint you as an opportunist who saw a chance to get hired by David and took it. Consequences be damned. Is that what you think? Patricia looked at her. I think you saw someone about to make a catastrophic mistake and you stopped it. But what I think doesn't matter. What we can prove matters. Outside, the November wind had teeth. Clara pulled her coat tighter and tried to breathe. How bad is this? She asked. Honestly, it's not great. The timeline of you getting hired by David after intervening in his deal with Vale, that's going to look suspicious to a jury. Whitmore's going to argue you had financial motive to sabotage Vale's investment. But I didn't know David would hire me. I didn't know anything except that the contract was predatory. I believe you. But belief isn't evidence. Patricia flagged down a cab. We need something that establishes Vale's pattern of behavior. Something that shows you weren't just a random server with delusions of legal expertise, but someone who genuinely recognized a predatory practice. Your case from 2 years ago is sealed under NDA. I can't use it without violating my own settlement agreement. Patricia's expression was grim. We need something else. Something public. Clara thought about Rachel Kwan, about the investigation that was publishing in 3 weeks regardless of whether Clara participated, about the 3 founders willing to go on record despite their NDAs. What if there was media coverage? She asked slowly. An investigation into Vale's business practices that came out before the trial. Patricia's eyes sharpened. That would change the entire context. You wouldn't be a lone voice making accusations. You'd be someone whose concerns were validated by investigative journalism. Would it be enough? It might be. Depends on how solid the reporting is. Patricia studied Clara's face. You've been contacted by a reporter, haven't you? Yeah. And you're thinking about cooperating? Clara nodded. Patricia was quiet for a moment, calculating. It's risky. Vale could argue you're trying to poison the jury pool, trying to win in the court of public opinion because you know you'll lose in actual court. But if the investigation is credible, if it establishes a pattern that corroborates your account, it undermines his entire narrative about you being a rogue employee with financial motives. So I should do it? I'm saying it's a strategic decision with significant implications either way. Patricia opened the cab door. Think hard about it. And if you decide to talk to this reporter, run everything past me first, every single word. Clara walked home instead of taking the subway, needing the movement to process everything. Her phone buzzed multiple times, texts from David asking how the deposition went, from Jess asking if she was okay, from Rachel Kwan asking if she'd made a decision. She ignored them all and just walked. By the time she reached her apartment building, the sun was setting and her decision was made. She called Rachel Kwan. I'll do it, Clara said when Rachel answered. I'll go on record, but I have conditions. I'm listening. Everything I say gets reviewed by my lawyer before publication. You corroborate my account with independent sources. And you make it clear that I'm not doing this for publicity or revenge. I'm doing it because what Vale does is wrong and someone needs to say it. Done. Rachel's voice carried barely contained excitement. When can we meet? Tomorrow. But Rachel, you need to understand something. This isn't just my story. There are other people, founders who got screwed by Vail but can't speak up because of NDAs. If we're doing this, we're doing it for them too. That's exactly what I want to do. They made arrangements to meet at a coffee shop in Brooklyn the next afternoon. After hanging up, Clara stood in her apartment's narrow kitchen, staring at the refrigerator that hummed too loud, and wondering if she'd just made the best decision of her life or signed her own death warrant. Jess came home an hour later, still in her work clothes, looking exhausted in the particular way that came from too many billable hours. "You look like you made a decision," she said, dropping her bag by the door. "I'm going on record. Talking to a reporter about Vail." Jess closed her eyes. "Of course you are. You think it's a mistake?" "I think everything you've done since that night at Aurelius has been a mistake by conventional standards. You got fired, you're getting sued, you're working for basically nothing, and now you're going public about all of it." Jess opened her eyes and smiled tiredly. But conventional standards haven't exactly been working out great for anyone lately, so maybe making a catastrophically brave decision is actually the smart play. That's the least reassuring reassurance I've ever heard. It's the best I've got. Jess pulled leftovers from the refrigerator. "You eating?" They ate together in companionable silence, and Clara felt grateful for the 100th time that Jess had somehow decided her disaster of a roommate was worth keeping around. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from her father. "Heard about the deposition from Patricia. She called to check if I could be a character witness. Told her absolutely yes. Proud of you, kiddo." Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. Tomorrow she'd meet with Rachel Kwan and tell her story. Next week, Patricia would file their formal response to Vail's lawsuit. The week after that, David would hopefully close the deal with Beacon Partners, and TerraStream would have actual funding. None of it was certain. All of it could collapse. But for the first time since that night at Aurelius, Clara felt like she was moving forward instead of just surviving. It wasn't much, but it was something. The coffee shop Rachel had chosen was aggressively Brooklyn. Exposed brick, reclaimed wood tables, and a chalkboard menu featuring drinks with names like the Proletariat and Oat Milk Revolution. Clara arrived 10 minutes early and ordered a regular coffee that cost $6, because apparently that was normal now. Rachel Kwan was exactly what Clara had pictured. Mid-20s, sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses, and the kind of energy that suggested she ran on caffeine and righteous anger. She had a recorder, 2 notebooks, and a laptop spread across the table before Clara even sat down. "Thanks for doing this," Rachel said, shaking Clara's hand with genuine warmth. "I know it's not easy. My lawyer made me promise to be careful about what I say. Patricia Zhao, right? I've read some of her work. She's good." Rachel opened one of the notebooks, pen ready. "Before we start, I want to explain what I'm doing here. This isn't a hit piece on Ethan Vail. It's an investigation into patterns of predatory investment practices in the startup ecosystem. Vail is a major part of that story, but he's not the only part." Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "How many other people are you talking to?" 3 founders who took Vail's money and regretted it. 2 venture capitalists who've watched him operate. A former employee of Vail Equity who left after witnessing practices they couldn't stomach. Rachel looked up from her notes. "But they're all either bound by NDAs or speaking on background. You're the only person willing to go on record with a specific incident. Lucky me." "I know it feels that way, but Clara, what you did at Aurelius, that matters. You saw something predatory happening in real time and you stopped it. That's rare." Rachel clicked her pen. "So let's start there. Walk me through that night, everything you remember." Clara did, slowly at first and then faster as the memories came back with uncomfortable clarity. Vail's calculated pressure. David's desperation. The acceleration clause buried in legal language designed to obscure. Her decision to speak up despite knowing it would cost her everything. Rachel took notes in shorthand that looked like a secret language, occasionally interrupting to ask for clarification or specific quotes. "When you read that clause," Rachel said, "how long did it take you to understand what it actually meant?" "Maybe 30 seconds. It's not that complicated once you know what you're looking for. The language is dense, but the structure is pretty standard for this type of trap." "This type of trap? You've seen similar clauses before?" Clara hesitated. "In law school, we studied predatory lending practices. This was basically the same thing, just dressed up in venture capital language instead of mortgage terms. Rachel made another note. And when you spoke up, what was Vale's reaction? Angry. Controlled, but angry. Like I'd broken some fundamental rule by interfering. Did he say anything specific? Threaten you? Clara thought back to Vale's cold smile, his promise to make sure she never worked again. He said he'd have me blacklisted from every restaurant in the city, that I'd regret what I'd done. Has he followed through? I don't know. I've applied to maybe 20 places and nobody's called back. Could be the economy, could be him. Hard to tell the difference. Rachel's pen moved faster. What about after that night? When did you hear from his lawyers? Clara explained about Whitmore's call, the deadline, the threatened lawsuit. Rachel listened with the kind of focus that made Clara feel like every word mattered. And you refused to sign his agreement, Rachel said, even knowing what it would cost you. Yeah. Why? The question was simple, but Clara didn't have a simple answer. Because I was tired of being scared, I guess. Tired of making myself small to survive. My dad said something about how if you only do the right thing when it's convenient, you're not really doing the right thing at all. That stuck with me. Rachel was quiet for a moment, just looking at Clara with an expression that might have been respect or pity, or both. Can I ask about your father? Patricia mentioned he's sick, Ms. Progressive Form. He's been getting experimental treatment, but it's expensive and insurance doesn't cover it. Clara felt her throat tighten. I left law school to take care of him. That's how I ended up serving tables instead of practicing law. And now you're working for David Chen's company? As a consultant, reviewing contracts, helping with legal due diligence. It's not much, but it's something. Vale's lawyers are going to use that against you. They're going to say you had financial motive to sabotage his deal with David. I know, they already did during my deposition. Rachel flipped to a new page in her notebook. Let me tell you about the other founders I've interviewed. There's a pattern. Vale targets companies that are technically promising but financially desperate. He offers terms that sound generous, substantial funding, operational support, strategic partnerships, but buried in the contracts are clauses that trigger under success conditions. If the company does well, Vale's equity position adjusts automatically. Sometimes the founder gets forced out entirely. Sometimes they get bought out at pre-success valuations. Clara leaned forward. So it's systematic, completely. I've documented at least 7 companies over the past 4 years where this exact thing happened. Different industries, different founders, but the same basic structure. Rachel pulled out a folder, spread documents across the table. Look at this one. ByteFlow, a data analytics startup. Took $20 million from Vale in 2022. Hit their growth targets within 18 months. Their equity split went from 50-50 to 80-20 in Vale's favor. The founder, Amanda Roth, was forced to sell her remaining shares for basically nothing compared to the company's actual value. Clara scanned the documents, her legal training kicking in. This clause is almost identical to the one in David's contract. Same trigger structure, same automatic adjustment mechanism. Exactly. And here's another one. Green Circle, renewable energy company. Took $40 million from Vale in 2021. Similar acceleration clause, similar outcome. The founder tried to fight it, got buried in legal fees, eventually settled. Are these founders willing to talk? On background, yes. On record, no. They all signed NDAs as part of their settlements. If they speak publicly, Vale can sue them for breach of contract. Rachel closed the folder. That's why your voice is so important. You're not bound by any agreement. You can actually tell people what you saw. Clara thought about the deposition, about Whitmore's hostile questions and barely concealed contempt. Vale's lawyers are going to destroy me. Maybe. Or maybe this article comes out before your trial and changes the entire context. Instead of being a lone voice making accusations, you're someone who exposed a pattern that investigative journalism confirmed. Patricia said the same thing. Patricia's smart. Rachel checked her watch. I have one more question, and it's personal. Are you scared? Clara laughed without humor. Terrified. I'm broke. I'm being sued. My dad's treatment is getting delayed because I can't pay for it. I wake up every morning wondering if today's the day everything collapses completely. So why keep fighting? Because the alternative is apologizing for telling the truth. And I've already spent 3 years making myself small and quiet and invisible. I'm done with that. Rachel smiled, and it was genuine. That's a good quote. Can I use it? Sure, at this point, what difference does it make? They talked for another hour, Rachel asking detailed questions about the contract language, the timeline of events, Clara's legal background. By the time they finished, Clara felt wrung out and oddly lighter, like confession without the religious overtones. The article publishes 2 weeks from Friday, Rachel said as they packed up. I'll send you a draft beforehand so you can review it. And Clara? Thank you. This matters more than you probably realize. Clara walked back to the subway feeling like she'd just jumped off a cliff and wasn't sure yet whether she'd land safely or hit rocks. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Beacon Partners wants to meet next week. Final due diligence before they commit. Can you be there? She texted back, absolutely. The meeting with Beacon Partners happened in their Manhattan office, which was somehow both more and less intimidating than Canton and Reed. Smaller space, less marble, but the 3 partners who sat across the conference table from Clara and David had the kind of sharp intelligence that suggested they'd heard every pitch and spotted every lie. Martin Reeves, the lead partner, was maybe 50 with gray hair and reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. David's told us you've been helping with legal review. That's good. We appreciate founders who take due diligence seriously. Clara's been invaluable, David said, and Clara could hear the nervousness in his voice despite his attempt at confidence. She caught several issues in our supplier contracts that I'd completely missed. Actually, I wanted to ask about that. Reeves opened a folder. Clara Hayes, 2 years at Columbia Law, left before completing your degree, now working as a consultant for TerraStream. That's an interesting trajectory. Clara felt her stomach drop. They'd done their homework. Family emergency. I had to leave school to take care of my father. And you met David how? The question hung in the air. Clara glanced at David, who looked like he wanted to help, but didn't know how. We met at Aurelius Restaurant, Clara said carefully. I was serving there. David was meeting with a potential investor whose contract I happened to notice had some problematic terms. Reeves exchanged glances with his partners. Ethan Vale. Yes. We heard about that. The startup community is smaller than people think. Reeves leaned back. We also heard Vale is suing you. Clara's hands tightened on the armrests of her chair. That's correct. For what specifically? Tortious interference? Defamation. He claims I damaged his business relationship with David. Did you? The question was direct, not hostile, but Clara felt it like a challenge. I pointed out an acceleration clause in his investment agreement that would have stripped David of most of his equity if TerraStream succeeded. Vale characterized that as interference. I characterize it as warning someone before they walked into a trap. One of the other partners, Janet Okoye, according to her nameplate, spoke up. We've dealt with Vale before. Not directly, but we've seen the aftermath. Companies that take his money tend to end up controlled by him regardless of the original terms. That's what I was trying to prevent, Clara said. Reeves put his glasses back on, studied some documents. Your lawsuit is still active. Yes, we're building our defense. My lawyer thinks we have a strong case, but these things are unpredictable. And if you lose? Clara met his eyes. Then I'll deal with the consequences. But that doesn't change the fact that I was right about Vale's contract. Reeves smiled slightly. No, it doesn't. He closed the folder. Here's my concern. We're about to invest $12 million in TerraStream. That's a substantial commitment. We need to trust that the people involved in this company are making sound decisions. David bringing on someone who's embroiled in litigation with one of the most litigious investors in Manhattan, that gives us pause. David jumped in. Clara's lawsuit has nothing to do with TerraStream's operations. She helped me avoid a catastrophic deal. That's exactly the kind of judgment we need. Or it's the kind of judgment that creates unnecessary legal exposure. Reeves looked at Clara. If we invest in TerraStream and you come on board officially, Vale could argue that we're benefiting from your interference with his deal. He could try to drag us into the litigation. Clara hadn't thought of that. The idea that her fight with Vale could contaminate TerraStream's funding made her feel sick. I can step back, she said quietly. If my involvement is putting the deal at risk, I'll remove myself. Clara, no, David started. David, this is your company, your future. I'm not going to be the reason Beacon walks away. Reeves held up a hand. Nobody's walking away. I'm just laying out the considerations. He looked at Janet and the third partner, Michael Sung, who nodded slightly. Here's what we're thinking. We proceed with the investment. David, you hire Clara as general counsel once the funding closes. But we include language in our investment agreement that isolates Beacon from any liability related to Clara's ongoing litigation with Vale. You want to firewall me, Clara said. We want to protect our investment. That's not personal. It's practical. Reeves softened his tone. Look, what you did at Aurelius took guts. Vale's a bully who's gotten away with predatory practices because most people are too scared to call him out, but courage doesn't insulate us from legal risk. David looked at Clara. Is that acceptable to you? She thought about Patricia's warnings, about Vale's strategy of making her toxic to anyone who tried to help her. This was exactly what he wanted, for her to become radioactive, unable to work, unable to rebuild. It's acceptable, she said, as long as TerraStream gets funded. The rest of the meeting focused on technical details, development timelines, market projections, regulatory considerations. Clara listened but didn't contribute much, still processing the firewall language that would define her professional relationship with the company she'd helped save. Afterward, on the street outside Beacon's office, David turned to her with frustration in his eyes. That was wrong. They basically treated you like a liability. I'm a liability, at least until this lawsuit resolves. You're the reason I still have my company, the reason I'm not signing my life away to Vale right now. David kicked at a crack in the sidewalk. This feels like I'm benefiting from your sacrifice while you get punished for it. That's kind of how the world works. Doesn't mean I have to like it. They grabbed coffee at a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1987. The vinyl booths were cracked, the coffee was terrible, and Clara loved it because it cost $2 instead of $6. Beacon's going to fund us, David said, stirring sugar into his coffee. I can feel it, which means TerraStream survives. We can actually do this. You deserve it. The technology is solid. The technology is yours too now. You're part of this whether you like it or not. David looked at her seriously. When the funding closes, I'm hiring you properly. Full salary, benefits, equity stake, and I don't care what firewall language Beacon wants. You're getting what you're worth. Clara felt her throat tighten. David, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. You took a risk on me when I was about to make the stupidest decision of my life. Let me return the favor. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Need to talk. Call me when you can. Clara excused herself and stepped outside to call. What's up? She asked when Patricia answered. Morrison Chase just filed an amended complaint. They're adding new allegations. Patricia's voice was tight. They're claiming you had a pre-existing relationship with David Chen before the night at Aurelius. That the whole thing was a setup to sabotage Vale's deal. Clara felt the sidewalk tilt. That's insane. I'd never met David before that night. They're alleging you had email correspondence with him, that you were consulting for TerraStream before the Aurelius meeting and your intervention was coordinated. That's a complete lie. I can prove. I know it's a lie, but it's a strategic lie. They're trying to establish conspiracy, which opens up broader discovery and lets them paint you as actively malicious rather than just misguided. Patricia paused. Clara, do you have any communications with David from before November 14th? Anything at all? Clara thought back, trying to remember. No. The first time I ever heard his name was when he walked into the restaurant. I didn't even know what TerraStream was until afterward. Phone records, emails, any digital footprint they could mischaracterize? Nothing, I swear. Then we'll prove it. Phone records, email logs, the whole thing. They're fishing, hoping you don't have documentation. Patricia's voice hardened. This is Vale getting desperate. The fact that he's resorting to fabrication means he knows his original case is weak. Or he's just that vindictive. Could be both. Patricia sighed. How did your meeting with Beacon go? Clara explained about the firewall language, about the careful distance they wanted to maintain from her litigation. Patricia listened without comment. Smart on their part, she said finally. Frustrating for you, but smart. Vale's strategy has always been to make people radioactive. Harder to do that if companies find ways to work with you despite the litigation. Does this amended complaint change anything for us? It accelerates our timeline. We need to file our response faster, establish your credibility before they poison the well completely. Patricia paused. When does Rachel Kwan's article publish? 2 weeks. That might actually help. If the article establishes Vale's pattern of predatory behavior before they can paint you as a conspirator, it undermines their narrative. Clara leaned against the diner's brick wall, watching traffic move past. I feel like I'm in a chess game where I don't know the rules. You're learning fast, and Clara, you're doing better than you think. Most people would have folded by now. After hanging up, Clara went back inside the diner. David looked up from his coffee, read her expression. More lawsuit problems? Vale's claiming we knew each other before Aurelius, that the whole thing was a setup. David's jaw dropped. We can prove that's false, right? Yeah, but it's going to make everything messier. Clara slid back into the booth. I'm sorry. This is exactly what Beacon was worried about. Me bringing litigation drama into your company. Stop apologizing. Vale's the one creating drama. You're just refusing to lie down and take it. Clara's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her father's care facility. Payment still overdue. Treatment paused until account current. Please contact billing. The words blurred as she read them. Treatment paused. Her father's experimental therapy, the thing keeping him mobile and coherent, stopped because she couldn't pay. I need to go, she said, standing up too fast. Clara, what's wrong? Nothing. I need to handle something. She left the diner without waiting for a response, walking fast with no destination in mind. Her bank account had $87. The overdue payment was $2,800. The math was simple and impossible. She found herself at a park, sitting on a bench, staring at her phone like it might spontaneously generate money. Around her, people walked dogs and pushed strollers and lived normal lives where medical bills didn't determine whether your father got to keep functioning. Her phone rang. Unknown number, which usually meant debt collector or scammer, but she answered anyway. Clara Hayes? The voice was female, older, professional. This is Eleanor Park. I'm the executive director of the Legal Aid Society of Manhattan. I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. Clara's brain struggled to catch up. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I read a draft of Rachel Kwan's article. She gave me permission to contact you because I think we might be able to help each other. Eleanor's voice was warm but direct. The Legal Aid Society has been trying to build a case against predatory investment practices in the startup ecosystem for over a year. We have founders who've come to us after being systematically exploited, but most are bound by NDAs or can't afford to fight back. Your situation is different. You're already fighting, with one lawyer who's working pro bono and a defendant who has unlimited resources. Which is where we come in. The Legal Aid Society can provide additional legal support, research assistance, expert witnesses. We can't take over the case from Patricia Zhao. She's doing excellent work, but we can supplement her efforts. Clara's head was spinning. Why would you do that? Because your case has the potential to set precedent. If we can prove that Vale's investment practices constitute fraud or unconscionable dealing, it opens the door for other founders to challenge similar agreements. Your fight becomes their fight. I'm not trying to set precedent, I'm just trying to survive. I understand, but sometimes survival and systemic change are the same battle. Eleanor paused. There's another reason I'm calling. The Legal Aid Society has discretionary funds for people involved in public interest litigation who can't afford their normal expenses. It's not much, but we could potentially help with some of your immediate financial needs. Clara's breath caught. How much is not much? We could probably manage a few $1,000s, enough to keep you stable while the case progresses. A few $1,000s, enough to restart her father's treatment, enough to breathe. What would I have to do? Let us support Patricia's work. Agree to let our research team help build the case. And if we win, agree to speak publicly about predatory investment practices. Eleanor's tone was gentle. This isn't quid pro quo. We're not buying your story. We're investing in a fight that matters. Clara closed her eyes, felt tears she'd been holding back for weeks finally break through. When can we start? They talked for another 20 minutes, Eleanor explaining the logistics and Clara trying to sound more coherent than she felt. By the time they hung up, Clara had a plan to meet with the Legal Aid Society the next day and a promise of emergency funding within 48 hours. She called the care facility immediately. This is Clara Hayes. I need to talk to billing about my father's account. The administrator who answered sounded tired. Ms. Hayes, as I explained in my message, we've had to pause treatment until... I'll have payment by Friday. Please restart his treatment. We can't process on promised payment. We need actual Friday. I promise. Please. Clara heard the desperation in her voice and didn't care. He needs this treatment. Please don't make him wait. A long pause. Then, I'll make a note. But Ms. Hayes, Friday is the absolute deadline. If we don't receive payment, we'll have to discontinue the therapy entirely. You'll have it. I promise. She hung up and sat on the bench, shaking with relief and residual fear. The money wasn't here yet. Friday was still a risk. But it was hope. And hope was more than she'd had an hour ago. Her phone buzzed with the text from Rachel. Article draft is done. Sending to you and Patricia tonight for review. Publishes Friday the 16th. Then another text from David. Are you okay? You left kind of abruptly. Clara texted back. I'm fine. Sorry for bailing. Talk tomorrow? His response came immediately. Whenever you're ready. She walked home slowly, watching the city move around her with the strange, disconnected feeling of someone whose life had just shifted in ways she didn't fully understand yet. The Legal Aid Society was getting involved. Rachel's article was publishing in less than 2 weeks. Beacon Partners was funding TerraStream. Her father's treatment would restart. None of it was certain. All of it could still collapse. But for the first time since that night at Aurelius, Clara felt like maybe she wasn't just surviving. Maybe she was actually fighting back. Rachel Kwan's article went live at 6 a.m. on Friday, December 16th, and by 9 a.m., the internet had caught fire. Clara was at the Legal Aid Society's offices when Patricia called, her voice carrying an edge of barely controlled excitement. Have you seen the response? I've been in meetings all morning. What response? The article has 40,000 shares on social media. It's trending on 3 platforms. Every major business publication is picking it up. Patricia paused. Clara, this is bigger than we thought it would be. Clara excused herself from the conference room where Eleanor Park's team had been walking her through their research on predatory investment clauses and stepped into the hallway. She pulled up Rachel's article on her phone. The headline read, The Price of Desperation, How One Investor Built an Empire on Founder Vulnerability. Rachel had done exactly what she'd promised, made it about the pattern, not just Vail. But Clara's story anchored the piece, providing the narrative thread that made abstract legal concepts feel immediate and personal. There was the scene at Aurelius, Clara's decision to speak up, David's torn contract. Then it widened to show the other founders, the systematic exploitation, the carefully constructed traps dressed up as opportunity. And woven throughout were Vail's own words from interviews and public appearances, his philosophy of leverage and strategic advantage, now recontextualized as evidence of predatory intent. The comments section was brutal. Hundreds of people sharing their own experiences, founders who'd been exploited, employees who'd watched it happen, investors who'd suspected but never confirmed. The consensus was swift and damning. Ethan Vail was a predator, and everyone had known it, quietly, but nobody had said it out loud until now. Clara's phone started buzzing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She ignored them and called David. Have you seen it? He asked immediately. Just read it. This is insane. TechCrunch just called me for comment. So did Bloomberg. I've gotten emails from 6 different founders asking if I'd be willing to talk about Vail's tactics. David sounded stunned. Clara, this is actually happening. People are listening. Are you okay with the attention? Are you kidding? This is the best possible outcome. Vail can't paint me as ungrateful or naive now. The whole industry knows what he tried to do. David laughed, slightly manic. Beacon called this morning. They want to accelerate our funding timeline. They think the publicity makes TerraStream look principled instead of risky. Clara felt something unclench in her chest. That's good. That's really good. It's because of you, all of this. It's because of Rachel's reporting. It's because you were brave enough to go on record when everyone else was too scared. David's voice went serious. I'm never going to forget that. After they hung up, Clara stood in the Legal Aid Society's hallway, watching the article's share count climb on her phone. Part of her felt vindicated, but another part, the part that had been trained to stay small and quiet, felt exposed in a way that made her skin crawl. Her phone rang again. This time she recognized the number, James Whitmore. She answered, Mr. Whitmore. Ms. Hayes. His voice was ice. I assume you've seen the article in the Manhattan Business Journal. I have. You understand that you've violated the implied confidentiality of ongoing litigation by discussing the case with media? I discussed my own experience. That's not a violation of anything. You've poisoned the jury pool, made it impossible for my client to receive a fair trial. Whitmore's control was slipping, anger bleeding through his professional veneer. This is witness tampering, jury manipulation. This is journalism. Maybe if your client's business practices weren't predatory, there wouldn't be anything to report. We're filing a motion for sanctions. We're going to ask the judge to dismiss your defense and enter summary judgment in Mr. Vale's favor based on your egregious conduct. Clara felt her stomach drop, but kept her voice steady. Do what you need to do, Mr. Whitmore. I'll see you in court. She hung up before he could respond, then immediately called Patricia. Whitmore just threatened to file for sanctions, Clara said without preamble. Said I poisoned the jury pool. He called me too. He's furious. Patricia sounded almost gleeful. Clara, this is exactly what we wanted. He's emotional, he's reactive, and he's making strategic mistakes. A motion for sanctions based on you talking to the press? That's desperate. No judge is going to grant summary judgment because you exercised your First Amendment rights. You're sure? I'm sure. This is Vale losing control of the narrative. He spent years operating in the shadows, using NDAs and settlements to keep people quiet. Now it's public, it's documented, and he can't make it go away. Patricia paused. How are you holding up? Clara thought about the question honestly. Terrified, relieved, both at the same time. That sounds about right. Get some rest this weekend. Things are going to move fast from here. But rest turned out to be impossible. By Saturday morning, Clara's name was everywhere. Reddit threads dissecting the article. Twitter debates about startup culture and founder exploitation. A TikTok video with 2 million views explaining predatory investment terms using Clara's intervention as the example. She'd become a character in a story she didn't fully control anymore. Some people painted her as a hero, standing up to corrupt power. Others called her an opportunist, someone who'd manufactured drama to get attention and a job. The comments ranged from supportive to viciously personal, strangers making assumptions about her life, her motives, her worth. Jess found her on Sunday afternoon, sitting on their couch scrolling through her phone with the kind of obsessive focus that suggested she'd been doing it for hours. You need to stop reading that, Jess said, physically taking the phone from Clara's hands. It's not healthy. People are saying I orchestrated the whole thing, that I targeted Vale deliberately to create a scandal. People say a lot of stupid things on the internet. Doesn't make them true. Jess sat down beside her. How's your dad? Treatment restarted Friday. The Legal Aid Society came through with the funding. Clara leaned her head back against the couch. He called me yesterday. Said he read the article 3 times and cried. Happy crying, he clarified, in case I was worried. That's sweet. He also said he's proud of me for finally getting angry, that I spent too many years being afraid and it's good to see me fighting. Clara smiled tiredly. Classic dad. Turns my existential crisis into a teaching moment. Sounds like he raised you right. Clara's phone, still in Jess's possession, buzzed with an incoming call. Jess glanced at the screen. It's Patricia. Clara took the phone back. Hey, we need to talk. Patricia's voice was serious in a way that made Clara's stomach knot. Morse and Chase filed their motion for sanctions this morning, but they also filed something else, a motion to dismiss their own complaint. Clara sat up straight. What? They're dropping the lawsuit, completely, with prejudice, meaning they can't refile. Patricia sounded like she was reading from a document. The filing cites changed circumstances and mutual agreement to resolve the dispute without further litigation. Mutual agreement? I didn't agree to anything. It's legal fiction. What it actually means is that Vale's firm realized they were going to lose and they're trying to exit before it gets worse. Patricia laughed, sharp and victorious. Clara, they're running. The article destroyed their narrative. They can't paint you as a rogue employee with an agenda when investigative journalism backs up everything you said. They can't claim you had improper motives when the pattern is documented across multiple companies. They folded. Clara couldn't process it. So it's over, just like that? Just like that. We still need to file a response accepting the dismissal, and there are some procedural steps, but yes, the lawsuit is done. You won. The words didn't feel real. Clara had been bracing for months of litigation, depositions, discovery, trial. She'd prepared herself for the long fight, the expensive loss, the systematic dismantling of her credibility. And now it was just over. "What happens to Vale?" she asked. "That's the interesting part. I've been getting calls all morning from other lawyers, other founders who read the article and want to explore their legal options." The ND. As that have kept people silent for years, some of them might not be enforceable if we can prove the underlying agreements were fraudulent. This could open the floodgates. Clara thought about Amanda Roth and the other founders Rachel had interviewed, bound by agreements that had silenced them even as they'd been systematically exploited. So they could fight back now. Some of them, yes. It depends on the specific terms of their settlements. But the article created a permission structure. It showed people they don't have to accept predatory behavior just because it comes wrapped in expensive legal language. After hanging up, Clara sat in silence, trying to understand what she was feeling. Relief, definitely. But also something stranger, a sense of dislocation, like she'd been running so hard for so long that stopping felt unnatural. "The lawsuit's done," she told Jess. Vale dropped it. Jess stared at her. "Are you serious? Patricia just told me. They're withdrawing the complaint." "Holy shit." Jess grabbed Clara in a hug that was probably too tight, but Clara didn't care. "You did it. You actually did it. I don't know what I did. I just didn't give up. That's literally all it takes sometimes. Just not giving up when everyone expects you to." Monday morning brought news that spread through the startup community like wildfire. 3 of Vale Equity's board members had resigned. 2 major institutional investors had pulled their commitments from his fund. And most damaging, a former employee had filed a whistleblower complaint with the SEC, alleging systematic fraud in how Vale structured and disclosed his investment terms. Ethan Vale's empire wasn't just cracking, it was collapsing. Clara watched it happen from TerraStream's office, where David had insisted she come help prepare for Beacon's final due diligence meeting. The co-working space had upgraded to an actual office now, small, but theirs. 2 engineers worked at standing desks, debugging code while David paced nervously. "Beacon's going to ask about the publicity," David said for the 3rd time. "How do I address it without sounding like we're capitalizing on drama? Tell them the truth, that we're focused on building good technology, and we're grateful that predatory investors are being held accountable." Clara looked up from the contract she was reviewing. "They already committed to funding you. This meeting is just procedural." "You don't know that." "I do know that. I reviewed their term sheet. The language is binding. They're locked in." One of the engineers, Sarah, who'd been with TerraStream since the beginning, looked over. "Is it true that Vale's fund is shutting down?" "That's the rumor," Clara said. "Nothing official yet." "Good. Guy's a parasite." Sarah went back to her code. "You did everyone a favor." Clara wasn't sure how to respond to that. She'd never set out to destroy anyone's career. She'd just tried to stop one bad contract from ruining one person's life. The fact that it had cascaded into something bigger felt both satisfying and uncomfortable. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Saw the news about Vale. Your mother would have been proud." "I know I am." The reference to her mother, dead 15 years now from cancer they couldn't afford to treat properly, made Clara's throat tight. Her mother had been a public defender, fighting for people who couldn't afford representation, working 70-hour weeks for barely enough money to survive. She died exhausted and broke, and absolutely certain she'd done the right thing. Clara had spent years thinking she'd failed to live up to that legacy. Maybe she'd been wrong. The meeting with Beacon went smoothly. Martin Reeves congratulated David on navigating a difficult situation with integrity, which was corporate speak for "thank you for not getting our investment associated with a scandal." They signed the final paperwork, transferred the initial funding tranche, and officially made TerraStream a venture-backed company. Afterward, David pulled Clara aside. "We need to talk about your employment contract." "David, we've been over this. I'm offering you $60,000 a year plus benefits and 2% equity. That's non-negotiable." David held up a hand before she could protest. "The Legal Aid Society helped with your lawsuit, but they can't pay your living expenses forever. You need actual income, and I need a general counsel who understands what predatory looks like." $60,000 a year. It wasn't Manhattan lawyer money, but it was survival money. Money that could pay rent and medical bills and maybe, eventually, let Clara finish her degree. What if I mess up? Clara asked quietly. What if I give you bad advice and it costs the company? Then we'll figure it out together, same as we've been doing. David smiled. You're not perfect, Clara. Neither am I. But you're smart and you're ethical, and right now that's exactly what TerraStream needs. She signed the contract that afternoon, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name. Her first real job in 3 years. Her first step back toward the future she'd thought was dead. That evening, she visited her father. He was in the common room again, same wheelchair, same book about the Civil War, but something in his expression looked lighter than it had in months. You did good, kiddo, he said when she sat down beside him. Really good. I didn't mean to blow up anyone's life. You didn't blow up anyone's life. You exposed someone who'd been blowing up other people's lives for years. There's a difference. He closed his book. You know what I've been thinking about? That student I told you about. The one who reported the cheating scandal. The Yale kid. Yeah, I ran into him a few years later. Asked him if he regretted it. You know what he said? Her father's smile was gentle. He said no, because even though it cost him friendships and made him unpopular, he learned something important. That his integrity wasn't for sale. That he could trust himself. That's what you think I learned? I think you already knew it. You just forgot for a while. He touched her hand. When your mother was sick, when the bills kept coming and we couldn't pay them, I watched her make choices every single day. Take extra cases, work longer hours, sacrifice her health to help people who couldn't help themselves. And I was angry at her for it, if I'm honest. Angry that she wouldn't just quit, get a corporate job, save herself. Clara had never heard him admit this before. What changed your mind? Nothing changed my mind. I'm still angry. But I also understand now that she couldn't have lived with herself if she'd made different choices. Her integrity wasn't optional. It was who she was. He squeezed Clara's fingers. You're like her. You can't do the safe thing if it means betraying who you are. That's not weakness. That's strength. Clara felt tears she'd been holding back finally break through. I was so scared, Dad. I'm still scared. Being scared doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. He wiped her tears with his shaking hand. And you're doing just fine. The next few weeks moved faster than Clara could fully process. TerraStream hired 2 more engineers and moved into a larger office. David closed partnerships with 3 manufacturers in Asia who'd been skeptical until the Beacon funding made them take TerraStream seriously. Clara spent her days reviewing contracts, negotiating terms, and slowly remembering what it felt like to use her legal training for something other than survival. Vale Equity officially shut down in January. The SEC investigation was ongoing, but the fund's investors had already pulled out, unwilling to risk association with practices now under federal scrutiny. Ethan Vale himself had gone silent. No public appearances, no interviews. His social media accounts abandoned. Clara followed the news with detached interest. She didn't feel triumphant exactly. More like she'd watched a long con finally run out of marks. Rachel Kwan won a journalism award for her investigation. She called Clara to share the news, her voice bright with excitement. They're calling it accountability journalism, said it demonstrated how reporting can create real systemic change. You deserve it. The article was incredible. It was your story. I just wrote it down. Rachel paused. There's something else. I'm doing a follow-up piece on what happened after the article published. How the industry responded, what changes are being made, whether this creates lasting impact. Would you be willing to talk about your experience now that some time has passed? Clara thought about it. What would you want me to say? Just the truth. What it felt like to fight. Whether you think it was worth it. Can I think about it? Of course. No pressure. But Clara knew what her answer would be. She'd spent enough time hiding. If her story could help other people find their courage, maybe that was worth the discomfort of being public. She called Rachel back the next day. I'll do the interview, but I want to talk about more than just Vale. I want to talk about what it costs to speak up and why people don't, and how we make it easier for the next person. That's exactly what I want to write about. The follow-up article published in March, 6 months after the night at Aurelius that had changed everything. This one was quieter than the first, more reflective. Clara talked about fear, about the privilege of being able to fight when so many people couldn't afford to. about how courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The comments this time were different. Less heated debate, more personal stories, people sharing their own moments of speaking up or their regrets about staying silent. It felt less like scandal and more like conversation. In April, Columbia Law invited Clara to speak at a panel on ethics in corporate practice. She almost declined, still feeling like an imposter without a degree. But Patricia convinced her. "You have more real-world experience with ethical dilemmas than most practicing lawyers," Patricia said. "And you made the hard choice when it mattered. That's what students need to hear." So Clara stood in front of a room full of law students, kids who looked impossibly young and earnest, and talked about contracts and courage and the moment when principle became more important than survival. During the Q&A, a student raised her hand. "Do you regret not finishing law school?" Clara considered the question honestly. "Yes and no. I regret the circumstances that forced me to leave. But if I'd graduated on schedule, I'd probably be working at some firm doing document review and hating my life. Instead, I'm general counsel for a startup I believe in, working on problems that matter. So maybe it worked out the way it was supposed to." Another student. "Would you do it again? The thing at the restaurant, knowing what it would cost you." Clara didn't hesitate. "Yes. Every time." In June, David Chen stood on stage at a tech conference in Austin and told the story of almost signing away TerraStream to a predatory investor, and how a waitress he'd never met had saved his company. The video went viral in startup circles, shared and reshared with commentary about due diligence and founder education. Clara watched it from TerraStream's office, wincing at being called a hero, but grateful that David was using his platform to warn other founders. "You're internet famous now," Sarah said, looking over Clara's shoulder at the video's view count. "How does it feel?" "Weird. I didn't do anything special." "You did something most people wouldn't do. That makes it special." Clara thought about that later, walking home through the city as summer heat made the air thick and heavy. She'd spent so long thinking of herself as someone who'd failed, who'd compromised, who'd given up her dreams for practical necessity. But maybe survival was its own kind of victory. Maybe showing up every day and refusing to become someone you didn't recognize was actually the hardest thing you could do. Her father died in September, peacefully in his sleep after a particularly good week where he'd been lucid and talkative and himself. The experimental treatment had given him almost a year more than expected, and he'd used it well. Reading, talking, watching Clara rebuild her life with the kind of quiet pride that didn't need words. At his funeral, Clara stood in front of 50 people, former colleagues, students who'd kept in touch, friends from 30 years of teaching, and talked about integrity as inheritance, about how her father had taught her that principles weren't abstract concepts but daily choices, that who you were when it cost you something was who you really were. She scattered his ashes in the park where he used to take her as a kid, and tried to believe he'd be proud of the person she was becoming. TerraStream secured Series B funding in November, a $40 million round led by a consortium of impact investors who'd been following the company since the Vail story broke. David offered Clara an increased equity stake and a substantial raise. She negotiated hard, another thing she'd learned this year, that knowing your worth meant demanding it, and walked away with terms that made her financial future feel less like constant crisis. She started taking night classes at Columbia in January, determined to finish her degree. It was slower this time, 1 or 2 courses per semester while working full-time, but it was progress. The law school gave her credit for her work at TerraStream, acknowledging that real-world experience counted for something. On a cold evening in February, almost 2 years after that night at Aurelius, Clara sat in a coffee shop reviewing a contract for TerraStream's expansion into European markets. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Ethan Vail had been charged with securities fraud, multiple counts, multiple victims, facing up to 20 years if convicted. Clara read the article twice, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Vail had built an empire on exploiting desperate people. And now that empire was being systematically dismantled by the legal system he'd used as a weapon. She thought about texting David or calling Patricia, but instead she just sat with the news, letting it settle. This wasn't her victory. It was justice catching up to someone who'd avoided it for too long. Her phone buzzed again. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Amanda Roth. You don't know me, but I read about the charges against Vail. I wanted to say thank you. What you did at that restaurant, It gave me courage to talk to investigators about what happened to my company. I know this isn't your fight anymore, but you started something important. Thank you." Clara stared at the message for a long time. Then she saved the number and texted back, "It was everyone's fight. I'm just glad we're finally fighting it together." More messages came over the next few days. Founders she'd never met, people who'd read Rachel's articles, students from her Columbia talk, all of them sharing variations of the same story. They'd spoken up because she had. They'd found courage because she'd shown it was possible. Clara had never wanted to be a symbol. She'd just wanted to survive. But maybe that was the point. Maybe courage wasn't about grand gestures or heroic moments. Maybe it was just showing up, speaking truth, and refusing to compromise yourself into someone unrecognizable. Maybe it was choosing to be afraid and do it anyway. On a spring afternoon, Clara walked past Aurelius restaurant. It had closed down 6 months ago, replaced by something trendy and modern with Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood. She stood on the sidewalk where she'd stood that November night, fired and broke and terrified, holding David Chen's business card and wondering if anything would ever be okay again. She pulled out her phone and called Jess. "Hey, you busy?" "Just leaving work. What's up?" "Want to grab dinner?" "My treat. Actual nice dinner, not diner coffee." Jess laughed. "Look at you with your Terrastream money. Sure, where?" "Anywhere but Aurelius." "Deal." They met at a place in the West Village that had reasonable prices and food that didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. Over pasta and wine that didn't cost a week's salary, Clara told Jess about the messages she'd been getting, about Amanda Roth and the other founders finding their voices. "You started something," Jess said, "whether you meant to or not." "I didn't start it. I just stopped pretending it wasn't happening." That's literally the same thing. Clara thought about that. Maybe Jess was right. Maybe the difference between complicity and courage was just the decision to acknowledge what you saw instead of looking away. "I got accepted into the Columbia Trial Advocacy Program," Clara said. "It's competitive. I didn't think I'd get in with my weird transcript and missing years." "Of course you got in. You've been doing trial advocacy in real life while everyone else was in mock court. It's another year of night classes, another year of being exhausted and stressed." "So what? You've been exhausted and stressed for years anyway. At least this stress has a purpose." Jess raised her wine glass. "To finishing what you started, even if it takes longer than planned." Clara clinked glasses. "To finishing." She graduated from Columbia Law in May, 3 years later than originally planned, with a transcript that looked like a disaster and a resume that told a story no career counselor could have predicted. No firm was going to hire someone with her background, and that was fine. She already had a job she believed in. David Chen gave her a promotion at graduation, chief legal officer of Terrastream, with equity that made her more than just an employee but an actual stakeholder in the company's future. They'd grown to 40 employees now, with partnerships in 18 countries and technology that was genuinely making clean water more accessible. "None of this happens without you," David said at the small celebration Terrastream threw in Clara's honor. "Not the company, not the funding, not any of it. You saved me before I even knew I needed saving." Clara looked around the office at people who were building something that mattered, at technology that would help people who needed it, at a future that felt earned instead of inherited. "We saved each other," she said. That night, Clara sat in her apartment, a better apartment now, one without water damage and broken radiators, and thought about the distance between who she'd been and who she'd become. The scared waitress who'd almost let a bad contract slide because speaking up felt too dangerous. The desperate daughter who'd sacrificed everything to keep her father alive. The dropout who'd thought her dreams were dead. All those versions of herself were still there, still part of her story. But they weren't the end of it. Her phone buzzed with an email from the Legal Aid Society. They wanted her to join their advisory board to help develop resources for founders navigating predatory investment situations. The position was volunteer, no compensation, just the opportunity to help other people avoid the traps she'd learned to recognize. Clara didn't hesitate before accepting, because that was the thing she'd learned through all of this. Courage wasn't something you had or didn't have. It was something you chose again and again in small moments and large ones. It was showing up when it would be easier to hide. It was speaking when it would be safer to stay silent. It was trusting that your voice mattered even when everything suggested it didn't. And maybe most importantly, it was understanding that your fight wasn't just about you, that standing up for yourself meant standing up for everyone who couldn't, that your courage could give other people permission to find their own. Clara Hayes had walked into Aurelius as a waitress trying to survive. She'd walked out as someone who'd chosen integrity over safety, truth over comfort, courage over fear. The cost had been real. The job loss, the lawsuit, the months of barely surviving, the public exposure, the grief of watching her father die while fighting battles she'd never wanted. But so were the rewards, the company she'd helped save, the patterns she'd exposed, the people who'd found their voices because she'd used hers, the life she'd built from the wreckage of her old plans. In the end, that night at Aurelius hadn't been about bringing down a billionaire's empire, though that had happened. It hadn't been about becoming famous or inspiring people, though those things had happened too. It had been about a simple choice in a moment of crisis, to see something wrong and refuse to look away, to risk everything for a stranger because staying silent felt worse than any consequence. And from that one choice, everything else had followed. Clara opened her laptop and started drafting an email to Rachel Kwan. There were more stories that needed telling, more patterns that needed exposing, more people who deserved someone willing to speak up for them. The work wasn't finished. It probably never would be. But Clara wasn't afraid of that anymore. She'd learned that sometimes the most important battles were the ones you fought even when you knew they'd cost you. That integrity wasn't about being perfect. It was about being consistent. That courage was contagious if you were brave enough to go first. She'd been a shy waitress once, making herself invisible to survive. Now she was someone who couldn't stay quiet even if she wanted to. Someone who'd learned that her voice had power, and that power came with responsibility. Clara Hayes had torn up more than just a contract that night. She'd torn up the version of herself that accepted injustice as inevitable, that prioritized safety over truth, that believed speaking up was someone else's job. And in doing so, she'd discovered something her father had tried to teach her all along. That who you are when it costs you everything is who you really are, and that's worth more than any price you could pay.